Pride began winding down in the late 2000s, Mauricio Shogun Rua emerged as its last great superstar. His run of wins over several legends thrust him to the top of the 205 mantle, and fans wondered how he'd fare in the UFC having not yet entered his prime. Today we look at Shogun's 16-year tenure in the Octagon, one that continues to divide fans with how successful it truly was. Welcome to the INC, and this is the story of Shogun Rua in the UFC. It was clear early on Mauricio Shogun Rua was destined for MMA greatness. After spending his early years training Muay Thai, Shogun made his MMA debut as a raw 20-year-old, competing mainly on the Brazilian regional scene, including a win over future Strikeforce star Cyborg Santos. Following a 4-1 start, Shogun was invited to train with the fabled Shootbox Academy in Curitiba, which helped father the careers of MMA legends Anderson Silva, Wanderlei Silva, and Chris Cyborg. Among Shogun's training partners during this time was older brother Mauricio, a 12-year veteran who'd enjoy spells with Strikeforce, Elite XC, and Pride. It was his own tenure with Pride that launched Shogun to the global stage. In a 5-year run, the youngster emerged as one of the most exciting prospects in Brazilian MMA, winning 11 of his 12 fights with the brute aggression synonymous with shootbox. His use of foot stomps and soccer kicks made him a feared fighter in Pride's middleweight division. Shogun's finest hour came in 2005, beating a who's who of MMA legends to win the company's middleweight Grand Prix, including wins over Rampage Jackson, Alistair Overeem, and Ricardo Arona. By 2007, Shogun was considered the #1 205-pounder in the world, and with Pride defunct following its merger with the UFC, the Brazilian entering the Octagon was a foregone conclusion. Shogun formally signed a UFC contract in July 2007, with his debut coming at UFC 76 against Ultimate Fighter winner Forrest Griffin. Griffin's star power and lack of finishing acumen made him a perfect opponent for the UFC, who hoped to use a Shogun win to propel him to a light heavyweight title fight. Shogun justified his favorite status by taking Griffin down twice in the opening round, but the fight's high pace took a toll on the Brazilian's conditioning, allowing Griffin to claw back into the bout entering the later stages. While most pundits had the match level entering the final round, Griffin's team insisted he pile on the pressure to take the fight out of the judges' hands. So when an exhausted Shogun gave up his back in the dying stages of the third, the American didn't need to ask twice.
It is over! Forrest Griffin has defeated Shogun!
Shogun's loss is regarded as one of the biggest upsets in UFC history, and added with the setback for Mirko Cro Cop 6 months earlier, led to questions about the ability of Pride fighters entering the UFC. Shogun underwent surgery shortly after to repair damaged ligaments in his knee, later admitting he'd put the operation on hold to accept the bout with Griffin. The surgery forced Shogun out of action for 18 months, with many believing the lasting effects of the injury permanently impacted his career. Shogun went to the MMA retirement home to return to winning ways, beating at past his prime Chuck Liddell and a 44-year-old Mark Coleman, avenging his sole Pride loss in the process. While the fights helped restore Shogun's confidence, they did little to convince critics the fighter was back to his 2005 prime. So it came as a shock when Shogun was announced as the first title challenger to light heavyweight champion Lyoto Machida. It was there Shogun found his old magic, hammering Machida with leg kicks and body shots and leaving the normally evasive champion a sitting duck come the final rounds. While Machida found sporadic moments of success, he had no answer to the constant attacks of Shogun, and most people at the Staples Center believed they just witnessed a new champion being crowned. 3 men who disagreed, however, were sitting cageside.
Lyoto, the Dragon Machida!
Despite every journalist scoring the fight for Shogun, Machida was given the nod on all 3 scorecards, a decision still regarded as one of the worst in UFC history. Cecil Peoples, who scored the fight for Machida, further fanned the flames when he attempted to defend his decision in the days after, stating, "We always favor the fighter who's trying to finish the fight, and leg kicks certainly don't do that." Are you sure, Cecil?
One more look.
It's only 1 or 2 kicks.
Uh-oh! There it is. That's it!
Such was the backlash, the UFC broke with tradition and handed Shogun an immediate rematch at UFC 113. Having been a big underdog in their first bout, Shogun entered the return as a slight favorite, and took less than a round to repay the faith in him.
He got rocked. Shogun with the blowout. Mauricio Shogun is the new UFC light heavyweight champion.
Shogun became only the third man to win titles in both Pride and the UFC, returning the Brazilian to the light heavyweight summit and answering the critics who wrote him off after the Griffin loss. After undergoing further knee surgery, Shogun looked for a long and fruitful tenure atop MMA's strongest division. Instead, he'd be a footnote to one of the most infamous title reigns of all time. Shogun was set to make his first defense against Rashad Evans, but when the former champion was forced to withdraw due to injury, the call instead went to a 23-year-old rookie, Jon Jones. Jones showed no respect for his legendary opponent, dominating Shogun on the feet and ground before the Brazilian wilted to strikes near the end of the third. Jones became the youngest champion in UFC history, with Shogun the first of several legends the fighter would beat in his controversial career. Shogun was given the chance to bounce back in a rematch with Forrest Griffin at UFC Rio. While their first meeting was one of the worst of Shogun's career, the second was one of his best, as Shogun clipped Griffin early in the first before finishing with ground and pound. The fight proved to bosses that Shogun still had mileage as a title threat, leading to a match at UFC 139 against fellow Pride legend Dan Henderson. Henderson dominated the early exchanges, hammering Shogun with his trademark power shots and even dropping the Brazilian in the middle of the third. All roads pointing the way of the American after the first three stanzas. UFC 139 was one of the first cards to feature 5-round fights for non-title main events, and it became clear Shogun was far more prepared for the change. Over the next 2 rounds, the Brazilian rallied against the fast-hiring Henderson, threatening his Pride alum with submission attempts and ground and pound. Despite his best efforts, Shogun was unable to finish the notoriously durable American. Hendo's work in the first 3 rounds earning him a unanimous decision. The match is regarded as one of the greatest in UFC history, with Shogun and Henderson both being rewarded when it was inducted to the UFC Hall of Fame in 2018. The kudos of the Henderson fight saw Shogun embark on a new role as a TV fighter, with his next 6 fights featured prominently as part of the UFC's new deal with Fox. While the booking raised Shogun's profile to a wider audience, it coincided with a downturn in form. Further knee issues, along with a fast-evolving roster, limited Shogun to just 2 wins in 4 years, and later dropping out the rankings after a 36-second loss to Ovince St. Preux, although I personally blame the guy who threw a skateboard into the cage. The downturn led Shogun to overhaul his fighting style. Realizing he no longer had the chin to support his aggression, Shogun adapted his stand-up game to that of a savvy counter-striker, as well as falling back on the grappling he'd seemingly abandoned in his recent years. The changes saw Shogun embark on a mini-career turnaround. Between 2015 and 2020, Shogun amassed just 1 loss from his next 7 fights, including wins over division prospects Tyson Pedro and Corey Anderson. The run of form saw Shogun return to the division's top 10, with light heavyweight champion Daniel Cormier jokingly teasing the prospect of giving Shogun a shot at the belt. A short-notice Anthony Smith at Fight Night Hamburg ended the joviality.
Shogun's on the ground. How is he still standing? Right hand. Anthony Lion Smith takes out another legend.
The highest-profile feud of Shogun's later years came against submission ace Paul Craig. The 2 men fought twice over 2 years, with Shogun holding out for a draw after being rocked by the Scotsman early in the first, before Craig finished the rivalry in a rematch at UFC 255. After a second loss to Ovince St. Preux, Shogun could see the writing on the wall, and with the UFC returning to Brazil for the first time in 4 years, announced his next fight would be his last in the sport. Shogun savoring the chance to compete in front of his hometown crowd one last time. When Shogun touched down for his match with Ihor Potieri, he did so to a hero's welcome. Much of UFC 283 had been built around Shogun's last stand, with local fans hoping the Brazilian could roll back the years one last time. Unfortunately, in MMA, fairy tale retirements are a rare occurrence.
Potieri is charging down again. This
could do it, and that indeed does it.
Shogun called time on his career with 27 wins and 14 losses, 12 of which coming during his run with the UFC. Despite the inauspicious ending, Shogun's body of work couldn't be ignored, and at UFC 301, he became the latest inductee to the company's Hall of Fame. Appropriately, the announcement came just a few moments before old rival Potieri suffered a 54-second loss to Michel Pereira. It's almost as if they planned it. It's not controversial to suggest Shogun's UFC run was underwhelming. Knee injuries and the fanfare from his Pride tenure created an expectation the fighter could never reach. But the fact he achieved success in spite of that speaks to the fighter's talent. Fans will continue to support Shogun with whatever he pursues in his next chapter of his career. Although, I'd probably stay clear of the soccer pitch if I was him. This is the INC. Please like, share, subscribe, post your feedback in the comments, and subscribe to our Patreon page for more exclusive content.